To start this presentation, we are going to learn about the presidency of John Adams, but first, we're going to learn a little bit about the election process. The first thing to understand here is the framers of the Constitution, they did not imagine political parties forming from our government. Therefore, they saw the two best leaders in our government, the person that got the first place votes and the person that got the second place votes, would become the president and the vice president. Obviously, they were wrong. Imagine today, the winner of the Electoral College in the 2016 election, President Donald Trump, becoming the president, and then the second place getter, Hillary Clinton, being the vice president. Wouldn't work out very well. Okay, so by the third election, it's obvious that political parties are going to become a part of this process, and that's going to be really hard to do, is have someone from one party be the president and someone from the opposite party be the vice president. Not a whole lot of work would get done. So in this election, third election, John Adams is going to run as a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson is going to run as a Republican. This was a very, very close race, and John Adams won by only 3 electoral college votes. Therefore, since the old strategy is still in place, Thomas Jefferson came in second, even though he's from a completely different party, and he becomes the Vice President of the United States. To kind of highlight John Adams' presidency, the big thing is going to be the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. And what this is Congress, they passed these 4 laws, and they were fairly controversial, which means they were argued heavily against. And they were known as the Alien and Sedition. We'll kind of explain these here a little bit. Many Federalists argued that these laws were needed as protection against foreigners who might threaten the nation. But in reality, this is a party versus party dilemma, because the Alien and Sedition Acts are actually going to make life very difficult for the Republicans. We know that John Adams was a Federalist, and his supporters were Federalists. Therefore, they want to go against the opposite party, which are the Republicans at this time. 3 of the 4 laws were aimed at aliens, and alien is a term that is used for non-citizens or immigrants. So what these 3 laws did is it lengthened the time it took an immigrant to become a citizen and actually vote. It also allowed the president to jail or deport immigrants that threaten the government. So this is going to give the executive branch more power to determine if non-citizens were actually contributing and helping this country and not threatening it. If you're looking into politics, you know that kind of the immigration reform is at the head of President Trump's agenda as well. So this is still at the forefront of our nation today. The 4th law is known as the Sedition Act, and this is actually going to make rebellion against the government a crime. Essentially what this is if you speak out in any wrongful doing of the government, you will be punished for it. It is now illegal to speak out negatively about the government. Therefore, any printing, uttering, or publishing of any false writing is now illegal. Alexander Hamilton was a big proponent of this law, and he believed it would punish those who were trying to destroy the government. So this law or act was used to punish Republican newspaper writers. Obviously, Republican newspaper writers were going to write negatively about Adams, his laws, and how he was governing the nation, and he did not want that negativity. Here's kind of an example of what a newspaper said. So there was a newspaper that called him old, whiny, bald, blind, crippled, and toothless. Because of that publishment, there was 25 people arrested. Imagine today if someone was arrested for saying something wrong or harmful to Donald Trump. So yes, many of you may be saying, doesn't this go against free speech? Well, many argue that. Okay, essentially what this was doing was, as you can see in the image here, okay, it was quieting citizens that were going to speak up about our leaders. Once again, to connect this to today's society, this is something our president is continuously making known to us. There's no sedition act or law anymore. But President Trump His famous line, fake news. Okay, the mainstream media going against him, telling lies, making up false stories, things that are not true. He is still fighting this, and our president is still fighting opposition newspapers and articles in today's society. President Trump makes us known with his tweets. His famous Twitter account. Okay, this is just an example. He tweeted, "Don't believe the mainstream fake news media. The White House is running very well. I inherited a mess, and I am in the process of fixing it." Once again, our leaders today still trying to fight media for saying wrong things about them. And that is exactly what President Adams and Congress was trying to halt in the passage of the Sedition Acts. As I alluded to earlier, Republicans are going to see this as an attack on free speech. They are going to look to states to protect these freedoms since the federal government is actually enforcing this act. So they're going to try to pass things within the states. In Kentucky and Virginia, which were heavily Republican states at this time, they passed resolutions, which are statements that were based on something called the states' rights theory. This theory holds that rights not given to the government are given to the states. It also believes that states have the right to judge whether the federal government is using its powers properly, which in this case, their opinion was that the federal government was not using their powers properly. Unfortunately, no other states approved these resolutions, and the protest against this free speech violation died. We can now see that the quarrel between Republicans and Federalists is now at the forefront of politics. There's acts that are literally trying to diminish the other party, which is exactly what Washington warned against about. Now to kind of transition a little bit, there's actually going to be a new capital. Okay, finally our capital is going to move to Washington in the District of Columbia in 1800. Here on the left, this is actually part of the Capitol building, and this is only the Senate side. So this is what it looked like in 1800 when Adams moved there. To the right here is what the White House looked like in 1800. Very different than what it looks like today. John Adams' presidency is going to come to an end, and there is a new election in 1800. This is going to be, once again at the forefront, John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. Now this time, they each have their own vice presidential candidate. So they're trying to get rid of the framers trying to get the two best politicians at the head of our government. Jefferson is going to be a big proponent of the Constitution and state rights, and Adams is going to run at the forefront of peace and prosperity. Once again, newspapers are going to play a large role in this election, and newspapers from both sides are going to charge each candidate with attacks. They're going to call Adams a tyrant, and they're going to call Jefferson an atheist, which means someone that does not believe in a God. Hamilton is actually going to be against John Adams as a Federalist candidate. The main reason is because he did not like his foreign policy. He's actually going to try to convince voters to choose Pinckney over Adams. You are going to see this play a role in the election because the Federalist Party is almost split in their electoral votes because of Hamilton pushing them. This election is very, very close. One thing is clear, that Adams loses the election. So because of the new idea of presidential and vice presidential candidates running, there's actually going to be a tie between two Republican candidates. And this is going to be Jefferson and Burr. And here's an image that kind of shows the results of the 1800 election. As you can see, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tying with 73 electoral votes, and then Pinckney and Adams almost tying respectively in their votes as well. Now, what the Constitution says is if the Electoral College vote ends in a tie, the vote will be sent to the House of Representatives. So it is sent. They voted, and still a tie in the House of Representatives, which is absolutely unbelievable. So the House is actually going to debate for 6 days, and they're going to vote 35 more times to break the tie. But they're still going to be tied. Finally, Alexander Hamilton is actually going to break the tie, and he's going to ask his supporters to vote for Jefferson because he says Jefferson is less dangerous. Jefferson is then elected the third President of the United States after the House finally breaks their tie. So to kind of fight this and to kind of make sure this never happens again, in 1804, there's going to be an amendment put into place, and it's the 12th Amendment, and it's going to be added to the Constitution to prevent ties. What this amendment is going to do, it's going to call for the Electoral College to cast separate ballots for president and vice president. There wasn't such a thing in the election of 1800. That's why it was very confusing, and that's why there was a tie, because some people were voting for Burr, some people were voting for Jefferson, even though Burr was supposed to be Jefferson's vice president. So to kind of end the discussion on Chapter 11, we're seeing that political parties are now the forefront of our nation, and they're influencing politics fairly heavily. Okay, we can see the Federalists going against the Republicans and literally making laws to make life difficult for them. We're also seeing the restriction of free speech in this video as well with the Sedition Act. Okay, this is going to continue to play a role, and we're going to continue to see kind of a strict separation between political parties throughout the rest of the year.